Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive.
I'm really excited for this one.
Yeah, this one should be really interesting. We're tackling something you specifically requested.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a deep dive into cultural differences in communication,
Oh, cool.
specifically between Eastern and Western cultures.
Fascinating stuff. And we've got a really great conversation transcript to work with today.
It really gets into some deep stuff, like how communication styles can actually affect things like literature and even memory.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really struck me about this transcript.
It's amazing to think about, right?
Absolutely.
I was just reading an article about how Eastern cultures often rely on what they were calling nuanced language, using specific vocabulary and subtle wordplay to kind of get their meaning across.
Right. It's more about suggestion and implication rather than just stating things directly.
Yeah, and the article contrasted that with Western communication, which tends to be a lot more explicit.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know, relying on shared context and stuff like that.
It's almost like comparing a haiku with a billboard.
Aha! I love that.
One whispers, the other just shouts.
That's a great way to put it. And, you know, thinking about that kind of contrast, it reminded me of this time I was traveling in Japan. Even simple greetings felt so layered with meaning.
Oh, yeah.
Way beyond just the literal translation.
For sure.
It was like I was constantly trying to decode every interaction.
I bet. Especially when you're not fluent in the language.
Oh, absolutely. But the transcript takes this idea even further, suggesting that this difference might be reflected in their literature, too.
Interesting.
Like how Eastern works often demand a more active interpretation from the reader,
Makes sense.
while Western literature can be a lot more direct.
Right. Like you think about classic Eastern tales
Yeah.
packed with symbolism and allegory. It's like each story is a puzzle box just waiting to be unlocked.
That's a great analogy. And Western stories tend to lay their themes and meanings out more explicitly.
Yeah, you don't have to work as hard to figure out what the author's trying to say.
Right. It's all right there on the surface.
Pretty much.
It's like these different communication styles lead to different ways of thinking and learning. And the transcript really dives into this concept called registration,
Oh, yeah, registration.
which seems to be central to how we store information and understand the world around us.
It's all about creating mental markers or representations for things.
Okay.
It's like giving a name to a complex idea so you can easily recall it later.
So instead of having to explain this super complicated process every time you want to refer to it,
Exactly.
you just give it a name and boom,
You've registered it in your mind.
got it. And then whenever you think of that name,
The whole process comes flooding back.
it's like creating a mental shortcut.
A kind of filing system for our thoughts and experiences.
And the transcript argues that this registration happens all the time,
Oh, yeah.
often subconsciously.
Like when you meet someone new. You form an impression of them based on their appearance, their words, their actions.
Right.
You're essentially registering those details in your mind.
Building a mental model of who they are.
Exactly.
And just like with anything, that initial impression can evolve as you gather more information about them.
Right. It's not static.
No.
It's constantly being updated.
Which brings us to another really interesting point the transcript makes.
Okay.
The idea that learning history itself is actually a form of registration.
Whoa.
Think about it.
Yeah, great.
When we study history, when we delve into the lives of these historical figures, we're essentially creating these detailed mental representations of who they were and what they did.
It's like building a mental model of their whole existence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not just memorizing dates and names.
Right.
It's about creating a deeper understanding.
A richer context for their actions and impact.
Yeah, it's not just about what happened, but why it happened.
And who these people were.
So are you saying that studying history is basically a process of registering these figures in our collective memory?
It's a great way to put it.
Creating a richer understanding of the past.
That's the idea. And the transcript uses this really interesting analogy to illustrate this point.
Oh.
It compares the registration of a newborn baby to our understanding of historical figures.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this baby analogy.
Well, when a baby is born, they're officially registered, right?
Yeah, they get a name. They're added to all the records.
Exactly.
It's about establishing their existence in a formal way,
It's like creating a marker for them in the world.
even though they're just starting their journey.
Exactly. But here's the fascinating part.
Okay.
Our understanding of that registered individual, that baby, it changes and deepens over time.
Of course.
Oh,
As they grow, we learn more about their personality, their quirks, their dreams.
right. It's like that initial registration was just the starting point.
So in a way, we're constantly updating that mental registration as we get to know them better, like adding details to a mental portrait.
I like that.
Ah.
And I see how you're connecting this back to the history analogy.
Yeah.
We start with these basic facts about historical figures,
Right.
and then we build a more complex understanding as we learn more about their lives and motivations.
So it's like with the baby,
Uh,
that initial registration is just the beginning.
exactly.
And it's constantly evolving as we learn more.
It's a really powerful way to think about how we learn and understand the world around us.
It really is. What are your thoughts on this idea of constantly updating our mental registrations?
Well, it makes me think about how much emphasis we put on getting things right the first time.
Oh, yeah, like in school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're often taught that there's one right answer, one right way to do things. But this whole idea of registration suggests that learning is much more fluid and dynamic than that.
So it's not about getting it perfect the first time.
No,
It's about being open to new information and constantly refining our understanding.
exactly. It's like the difference between reading a Wikipedia article and having a lively debate about the topic.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
One is surface level. The other is about truly internalizing the knowledge.
And making it your own.
Exactly. And, this brings us back to that fascinating link between communication styles and registration.
Okay.
If Eastern cultures really do emphasize nuanced language and complex expression,
Yeah.
does that give them a cognitive edge when it comes to forming those deep, layered mental representations we've been talking about?
That's a really interesting question.
It is, isn't it?
If their communication style naturally encourages them to look for deeper meaning and make subtle connections,
Yeah.
could that translate into a different way of processing and retaining information?
It's certainly possible.
I'm starting to see how all of this could tie together.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating line of inquiry.
It is.
And the transcript does offer some insights into how this registration process might differ across cultures.
Okay.
But before we delve into that,
Let's take a closer look at how the transcript itself tries to define and summarize this complex concept of registration.
ooh, meta.
Right.
We're trying to register the concept of registration.
Exactly.
I love it. Let's unpack how the transcript tackles that.
Okay.
How does it define registration?
Well, it explores several different approaches.
Okay,
Each highlighting a different facet of registration.
got it.
One of the simplest summaries focuses on registration as a way to create a record or code to identify and track things accurately.
Okay, so it's like giving something a unique identifier.
Exactly.
So you can easily reference it and understand what it represents.
Like serial numbers on products or student ID numbers.
Right.
It's about creating a system for organization and identification.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But the transcript doesn't stop there, does it?
No, it goes deeper. It offers a more abstract summary,
Okay.
suggesting that registration is about creating a representation to foster a deeper understanding of something. So it's less about the practical act of labeling
Right.
and more about building a mental model that captures the essence of what's being registered.
Exactly. It's like trying to capture the soul of something, not just its external features.
Let's see. I see. And then there's a summary that focuses on the benefits of registration, highlighting how it helps us organize and access information more easily.
That's right. This perspective focuses on the practical advantages of having a well-structured system for storing and retrieving knowledge.
So we have a spectrum of summaries here,
We do.
each with its own emphasis.
Right. One is concrete,
Uh-huh.
focused on the mechanics,
Another is conceptual, delving into the meaning.
and the third highlights the practical implications.
And the transcript emphasizes that the best summary really depends on the context.
Exactly.
It's about choosing the approach that will resonate most effectively with your audience and your purpose.
That's right.
That's a great reminder that even when we're trying to simplify complex concepts, there's still a strategic element involved.
Absolutely. And I think that same principle applies to everything we've been discussing today.
Oh, yeah.
Understanding cultural differences in communication,
Uh-huh.
exploring the concept of registration.
And even learning history.
It's all about finding the approach that resonates with us personally
Yeah.
and helps us make meaning out of the world around us.
Well said. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive,
We have.
but I'm eager to hear more about how these different summaries of registration might play out in different cultures.
Me too.
I'm also curious to see if the transcript offers any specific examples of how Eastern and Western communication styles manifest in real-life situations.
Oh, yeah. That would be great.
Well, what do you say we take a deeper dive into those aspects in the next part?
Let's do it. Picking up where we left off, I think it's fascinating how the transcript uses these different summaries of registration to illustrate the very concept it's describing.
Yeah, it's like a meta demonstration of the idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the most compelling examples of how this plays out across cultures is in storytelling.
Oh, yeah. How so?
The transcript touches on how Eastern storytelling often uses symbolism and allegory, requiring the audience to actively register the meaning.
So
Right.
instead of having the moral of the story spelled out for you, like in some Western fairy tales, you have to piece it together yourself.
Right, like those beautiful, intricate folk tales with hidden layers of meaning.
Exactly. Each symbol or character represents a complex idea, and the audience has to actively engage with the story to register those representations and extract the deeper message.
That's the idea. It's almost like a mental workout,
I like that.
training your mind to look for connections and interpret meaning beyond the surface level.
So by constantly having to register these symbolic meanings in stories, it becomes almost second nature to look for deeper meaning in other areas of life as well.
That's the idea the transcript is exploring.
Yeah.
And it contrasts this with Western storytelling, which, as we mentioned earlier, can be more direct and explicit in its messaging.
Right. Think of those classic Western films where the hero's journey and the moral of the story are pretty clear-cut.
Exactly. It's the difference between a treasure map that leads you straight to the X and one where you have to decipher cryptic clues along the way.
Perfect analogy. And the transcript goes even further, suggesting that these different storytelling traditions might even influence how people form memories and process information in daily life.
Wow. That's a pretty big claim.
It is. Are you saying that the way we're exposed to stories as children could actually shape our cognitive patterns later in life?
That's a fascinating question, and the transcript certainly seems to suggest a link between cultural narratives and cognitive development. It's like those stories become the building blocks for how we understand the world and organize our thoughts.
It's mind-blowing to think that something as seemingly simple as storytelling could have such a profound impact on our mental frameworks. But I have to ask, does the transcript provide any concrete examples of how these differences in registration might manifest in real-life communication?
Absolutely. It dives into a few specific scenarios that highlight the contrast between Eastern and Western communication styles.
Like what?
For instance, it talks about how giving and receiving feedback can be perceived very differently across cultures.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. I've heard that in some Eastern cultures, direct criticism can be seen as disrespectful, even if it's well-intentioned.
Exactly. The transcript explains that in cultures that emphasize nuanced language, feedback is often given indirectly, focusing on suggestions for improvement rather than pointing out flaws directly.
It's like the difference between saying, this could be even better if, versus this needs to be fixed.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the transcript argues that this indirect approach is rooted in the idea of preserving harmony and saving face, which are often highly valued in Eastern cultures. In Western cultures, on the other hand, directness and clarity are often prized, even if it means being more upfront with criticism.
So it's not just about the words themselves, it's about the underlying values and social norms that shape the way those words are delivered and received.
Exactly. And this difference in communication styles can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings, especially in cross-cultural interactions.
Oh, I can definitely see that happening.
The transcript gives the example of a Western manager giving direct feedback to an Eastern employee.
Mm-hmm.
The employee might interpret this as harsh and disrespectful, even if the manager had no intention of causing offense.
Oh, totally. It's like they're speaking different languages, even if they're both using English.
That's a great way to put it.
Uh-huh.
And this is where the concept of registration comes back into play.
Okay, how so?
The transcript argues that to truly understand and appreciate these cultural differences, we need to register them in our minds, not just as abstract concepts, but as lived experiences that shape how people interact and communicate.
So it's not enough to just know intellectually that different cultures have different communication styles. We need to actually experience those differences firsthand to truly understand their impact.
That's the idea the transcript is driving at. It's about moving beyond textbook definitions and embracing the messy, nuanced reality of how culture shapes our interactions.
It makes me think about how valuable travel and cross-cultural experiences can be. It's one thing to read about cultural differences, but it's another thing entirely to actually live them and see how they play out in real time.
I completely agree. And the transcript even suggests that simply exposing ourselves to different forms of art and literature can broaden our understanding of these cultural nuances.
So by watching foreign films, reading translated novels, listening to music from different cultures, we can start to register those different ways of expressing emotions, conveying ideas, and interacting with the world.
Exactly. And the more we expose ourselves to these diverse forms of expression, the more nuanced and sophisticated our own registration process becomes.
It's like we're expanding our mental capacity to understand and appreciate the vast spectrum of human communication.
I like that. But I'm curious, does the transcript offer any practical tips for bridging these cultural divides and communicating more effectively across cultures?
That's a great question. It's one thing to talk about these differences, but it's another thing entirely to actually navigate them in real life.
Right. So what can we actually do to improve our cross-cultural communication skills?
I'm glad you asked because the transcript does touch on a few key strategies.
Oh, good. Let's hear them.
One of the most important it emphasizes is active listening.
Active listening, yes.
It's about really tuning in to what the other person is saying, not just with your ears, but with your whole being.
So it's not just about waiting for your turn to speak, but about trying to truly understand the other person's perspective, even if it's different from your own.
Exactly. And the transcript highlights the importance of paying attention to nonverbal cues, which can be particularly crucial in cross-cultural communication.
Right, because body language and facial expressions can convey so much meaning, especially when words might be failing us.
But I have to imagine it's not always easy to decipher those nonverbal cues, especially when you're coming from different cultural backgrounds.
That's true, and the transcript acknowledges that. It stresses the importance of being patient, asking clarifying questions, and being willing to admit when you don't understand something. It's about creating a safe space for open and honest communication, even if there are bumps along the way.
So it's about approaching these interactions with humility and a willingness to learn rather than assuming we already have all the answers. It's like we're all students in the grand classroom of human communication, constantly learning from each other.
Beautifully put. And, this brings us back to that final thought-provoking question the transcript poses. If mastering this concept of registration can enhance our understanding of cultural differences and improve our communication across those divides, could it be the key to fostering deeper connections and empathy in an increasingly interconnected world?
That's a powerful question to ponder. It's like we've come full circle from exploring the nuances of language and storytelling to considering the broader implications of registration for building bridges between cultures.
And it strikes me that this concept of registration isn't just limited to cultural differences. It applies to so many aspects of life, from how we learn new information, to how we form relationships, to how we make sense of our own experiences.
Yeah.
It's about being present, engaged, and constantly seeking deeper meaning.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. It's like registration is the key to unlocking a richer, more meaningful existence. But before we get too philosophical, I think it's time to shift gears and explore some of the practical takeaways from this deep dive. In the final part, I'd love to discuss what steps we can take to improve our own registration skills and become more effective communicators, learners, and human beings.
I'm game for that. Let's delve into those practical insights and see what we can glean from this fascinating exploration of communication and culture.
Okay, so we spent the last two parts really digging deep into this idea of registration. How it shapes the way we understand the world, how we communicate across cultures.
It's a powerful concept.
It really is, but now I think it's time to bring it all home.
Okay.
What are the practical takeaways here?
Right. What can we actually do
to become better registrars in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. So let's try to answer it. What do you think?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways for me is the importance of being more conscious of our own registration process.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
It's about recognizing that we're constantly creating these mental models, these representations of the world around us, and being mindful of how those models shape our perceptions and interactions.
So it's like stepping back and asking ourselves,
Yeah.
how am I registering this information?
Right.
What biases or assumptions am I bringing to the table?
Exactly.
Am I truly open to new perspectives?
No.
Or am I just fitting everything into my pre-existing mental framework?
It's so easy to do that without even realizing it.
It really is.
We all have our own biases and filters
Yeah.
that shape how we see the world.
So how do we become more aware of those filters?
Well, one of the most powerful ways to challenge our own mental models is to actively seek out diverse perspectives.
Ooh, I like that.
It's about exposing ourselves to different cultures,
Yeah.
different ways of thinking,
Yeah.
different ways of being in the world.
So it's not just about traveling to exotic destinations.
Though that's certainly valuable.
Right. It's about engaging with people from different backgrounds in our own communities.
Yeah.
Reading books and watching films from different cultures. Even just being curious about the world outside our own bubble.
It's about expanding our horizons.
And our minds.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this brings us back to that fascinating link between registration and communication.
Oh, yeah.
The more diverse our experiences, the more nuanced and sophisticated our own registration process becomes.
It's like we're constantly adding new tools to our mental toolbox.
A great way to put it.
Allowing us to understand and appreciate the world in a more complex and nuanced way.
Exactly. But I have to admit, sometimes it feels overwhelming to try to keep up with all the information and perspectives out there.
Oh, absolutely. It's like drinking from a fire hose sometimes.
That's a great analogy.
So how do we manage that information overload?
Right. How do we actually integrate it into our lives in a meaningful way?
That's what I'm struggling with.
Well, the transcript does offer some practical advice.
Okay, I'm all ears.
One of the key strategies it highlights is the importance of active listening.
Active listening. We've talked about that before.
We have. But it's worth repeating.
Because it's so important.
Absolutely. It's not just about hearing what someone is saying, but about truly engaging with their ideas.
Okay.
Trying to see the world through their eyes.
So it's about putting aside our own assumptions and judgments.
Yeah.
And really trying to understand the other person's perspective, even if we don't agree with it.
Exactly. And, active listening isn't just about being polite or respectful.
Though those are certainly important.
Of course. It's about recognizing that everyone has something valuable to teach us.
Okay.
Even if their experiences are different from our own.
It's like we're all pieces of a giant puzzle. And by listening to each other's stories, we can start to see the bigger picture.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It is, isn't it? And the transcript also emphasizes the importance of asking clarifying questions.
Oh, yeah.
It's about not being afraid to say, I don't understand, or can you explain that further?
Right. It's about creating a space for open and honest communication.
Where we can learn from each other without judgment.
Exactly. So it's about approaching these interactions with humility and curiosity.
Yeah.
Recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
That's a tough one for me sometimes.
I know it can be, but it's so important.
It really is.
Because it allows us to learn and grow in ways we never thought possible.
It does. Thinking about all of this makes me realize that registration isn't just about understanding other people. It's about understanding ourselves as well.
Well, that's a good point.
It's about being mindful of our own thoughts, feelings, and motivations, and recognizing how they shape our interactions with the world.
That's such an important point.
It is, isn't it?
It's about developing that inner awareness.
Yeah.
That capacity for self-reflection.
Which allows us to engage with the world in a more conscious and compassionate way.
Exactly.
So it's like registration is a journey of lifelong learning and discovery.
It is.
Both inward and outward.
Beautifully put.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
The beauty of registration is that it's a continuous process, a journey of growth and expansion.
We're always learning, always evolving.
And by embracing curiosity.
Yeah.
Humility.
And a willingness to learn.
They can all become more effective communicators, more compassionate human beings.
And more engaged citizens of the world.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to reflect on your own registration process.
I think that's a great idea.
How are you making sense of the world around you? Yeah.
What steps can you take to broaden your perspectives, deepen your understanding,
and connect with others in a more meaningful way?
These are questions we should all be asking ourselves.
I agree.
And remember,
yeah,
it's all about being present, engaged,
uh-huh,
and open to the endless possibilities of learning and growth.
The journey of registration is a journey worth taking.
It really is.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of registration.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep those minds curious.
And keep exploring.